Welcome to the fourth episode of the Weber TV show, video podcast series of the regional Weber initiative, coordinated by European Policy Center, CEP in Belgrade, and implemented through the Think for Europe network, a network of think tanks in the Western Balkans. My name is Milena Mihajlović Denić, and I am the program director of European Policy Center Belgrade, as well as the team leader of the Weber initiative. For this episode, I'm joined by Peter Vagi, who is the regional Western Balkan manager in the Sigma OECD program, the program joint initiative of the European Union and OECD working on public administration reform in the Western Balkans and many other countries, actually. So, Peter, welcome, first of all. It's great to have you here. And I would like to start us off by just a short introduction into the work of the Sigma program. What does Sigma stand for? What is it about? And why are these assessments and the principles of public administration that Sigma is all about, why are they important?
Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. So, well, Sigma is a joint initiative of the OECD and the EU, principally financed by the EU, for more than 30 years now, which has been established together by the OECD and the EU, really jointly together, for the purpose of supporting countries who want to join the European Union on developing their public administration. Sigma itself stands for Supporting Improvement of Governance and Management, and it is a program which is dealing with public administration under the framework of the principles of public administration. The principles originally have been developed in 2014 and has been recently revised in 2023. And this is a conceptual framework to summarize the key aspects and the key elements of how a good public administration should look like. The principles are designed by 6 thematic areas, the first one being strategy, covering the strategic framework of public administration, but also nowadays the innovation aspect of public administration. The second area is policy development and coordination, which is dealing with evidence-based policy making, but also the transparency of policy making and the functioning of center of government as well as the parliament's role in policy making. The third area is public service and human resource management, which is mostly about the employment framework of civil servants or public servants in a wider sense. The fourth area, what we are currently calling organization accountability and oversight, is dealing with the organizational structure of the administration, multi-level governance, which is also a new area and a new addition to what we are doing and what we are conceptualizing for public administrations. It is also dealing with access to information, free access to information. It deals with the oversight institutions. It also covers integrity, and it also covers the functioning of the administrative judiciary. Mm-hmm. The fourth area is service delivery and digitization, which is about administrative simplification, service modernization, digital tools, and digital enablers. The fifth area, large area, is public finance management, which is the sixth area, which is public finance management, covering budget planning, budget execution, also internal audit, internal control, as well as external audit, and also public procurement.
So it's a huge array of different areas. No wonder
Yes.
you get the numbering wrong sometimes. So in these 6 areas, actually, this is a huge scope of the functioning of the public administrations that Sigma is covering. So how do the principles of public administration then fall into the scope of these assessments? How are assessments then done, and why are they important?
Okay, so ultimately the first thing what I probably need to explain is why the Commission thought in 2014 that public administration needs to have a specific space in the accession process.
Because this is relatively new, right?
It is relatively new compared to the classical, more acquis-driven, chapter-driven accession, which was rather formalistic. So the Commission also, with the accession of new member countries, gradually realized the importance of the fundamental functioning of the public administration. And this is why it became the third so-called fundamentals first in 2014. But the Commission also needed to have a tool to assess how the different countries are currently performing and how they are progressing. So apart from this conceptual framework, which is the principles, which are based on EU good practices, international good practices, OECD and EU standards, Sigma has also developed the so-called methodological framework, which is a large compound of different data points, indicators, different measurement aspects. So a huge framework which makes us able to say something relevant vis-à-vis the performance of the countries, vis-à-vis the principles themselves.
And obviously in a very evidence-based manner.
Yeah.
I mean, if there is a whole methodological framework and indicators, I guess that, the purpose is to ensure that all the assessments are as evidence-based as possible.
Absolutely. And it is not just simply evidence-based on the basis of expert opinion. It is evidence-based by utilizing multitudes of different tools, administrative data, different surveys. In the extended version of the methodological framework, Sigma is running now business surveys, citizen surveys, but also surveys in civil service and also specific surveys related to some aspects of public procurement. But we are also utilizing publicly available data, different reports, different legislation which is available and which has been provided to us. We are also utilizing interviews, so different methods. The essence of the methodology is that this is fully standardized. We are assessing all the accession countries or all the Western Balkan countries in this matter, what is currently happening according to the exact same methodology.
So that also allows for comparability between the countries that are assessed. So
Yes.
Sigma is now at the, let's say, end point of the latest assessment. You don't do these assessments every year.
No.
You do them once every
3 years, roughly.
Yeah, roughly
Yes.
3 years. So, and obviously, I mean, because this is a huge task,
Yep.
huge endeavor, but also, I guess, because in public administration reform, things don't happen overnight, they don't happen very
Exactly.
quickly, the reform processes are quite slow. So, since the last assessment, which took place in 2021,
Yes.
what has changed in your approach and what is new with this assessment? How is it different from the previous ones?
Well, there are many differences. Many of them are rather technical, how we are creating the scale on which we are assessing the different aspects of the principles. But ultimately what is important is that we developed or revised our methodology according to the revision of the principles. So there are no new additions, like the ones which I have mentioned.
You mentioned in
We have
2023
digital.
they were
Exactly.
revised. Yeah.
So it is a consequence of revising the principles. So now we are measuring also multi-level governance. We are measuring digital specifically. We are measuring innovation in public administration. But also we wanted to have a little bit additional depth in terms of the practices, in terms of the results and outcomes of the different reform efforts. So we also wanted to enhance the balance between this kind of general basics of institutions, legislation, the policies, and how they are implemented. So,
and what outcomes and impacts they create.
absolutely.
Right?
And in that sense, the current methodology is also more heavy.
Yeah.
So we have roughly expanded our methodology with 30 to 50%. So it's quite substantive. Just as an indication, we have more than 270 different sub-indicators, and they are really the essence of the measurement, but we have more than 1,600 measurement points. So it's a huge undertaking, that's for sure.
And I think as far as I know, this is the only area of reforms in the EU accession process that actually has such a meticulous and detailed methodology and where assessments are done with this level of depth. And I believe that it can really represent a good case for some other areas, for example, the functioning of democratic institutions and other areas which do not have the same kind of attention and scope in the assessments. So Since you're already at the end of the current assessment, I would like to ask you to share with us a little bit about the latest results.
Okay.
First of all, let's start with the good sides. Let's start with the positives, and I promise we will not finish with the negatives. But to start off with the positives, what is the Western Balkan region good at? Like, can we say that there are some areas or some aspects of public administration reforms where the region is faring particularly well, where there are really, good examples of reforms that are already, let's say, achieved and implemented according to the standards that the principles
Well,
pose?
I would say that, all the areas, the 6 areas which I was listing, they have all the different bits and pieces. There is no such area which comprehensively is faring better than all the others. There are certain elements here and there. And obviously, on those areas where the international standards or the EU acquis is driving the reform expectations, the performance is somewhat better. So some elements of public procurement is definitely worth mentioning, but also external audit is a case for such. Of course, we are also seeing that in other areas, which are probably less covered for the time being, at least by formal acquis, some substantive progress has been made. Service delivery is also a typical example of that, but it's also happy news for Sigma, who is intensively working together with the national administrations of the Western Balkans on public administration reform strategic frameworks, is that we are seeing that the strategic framework and the whole environment to lead the policy reforms in developing public administration is getting better.
Okay, and when we compare the countries, can we speak about leaders in some areas? Who is doing best in which
We can,
aspects?
to some extent. I am not going into all the full details.
Yeah, of course.
Of course, and it's also important.
It would require us to speak for hours if we wanted to go into details.
And on average, what can be expected, we are hopefully shortly publishing our reports, let's say in a couple of weeks or months' time. One report is between 170 to 200 pages long. So there are loads of details, and obviously we cannot cover them in such a short period. And overall, it's close to impossible if we want to cover them all for all the 6 Western Balkan economies. But there are leaders. Typically what we see is that in certain areas we have leaders, but especially on certain aspects we have leaders. Altogether, we have these kind of composite indicators. Altogether, we have 36 indicators. Currently, as it seems that for the majority, for 13, Albania is the regional leader.
Okay.
For 10, it's Serbia is the regional leader. For 8, it is Kosovo, and the rest is either North Macedonia or Montenegro. We do not see, for the time being, any of our composite indicators where Bosnia would be a regional leader.
Okay.
On the different areas, if we go a little bit into the details, I have a couple of notes in front of me because it's really
maybe
comprehensive.
just to hear some examples.
For example, on strategy, which is covering the whole strategic framework. Serbia is the leader, with North Macedonia recently picking up with the establishment of the strategic framework and working on its implementation. On policy making, it's a little bit more complex, but we have 7 indicators for the policy development and coordination area.
Yeah, it's a large area.
It's a larger and more complex, uneven area. There are 3 of these indicators where Montenegro is the leader. On public service and human resource management, according to our assessment, it's Albania who seems to be the regional leader, but the competition on different indicators bringing the different countries relatively close. So for example, on public service and HRM, on certain aspects, Serbia is really close second. On the accountability area, it's really scattered because of also the different topics.
And the accountability area is very large.
It is large, yes, and it's really diverse. So Kosovo is leading on the integrity and on the organization or the rationalization of organization, partially because of recent reforms, which are currently ongoing in Kosovo in that area. Serbia is a regional leader on open government, to some extent also on some functioning of the oversight institutions. North Macedonia is leading in the functioning of the administrative judiciary. Albania is leading on multi-level governance. So it's really scattered and devised within the Western Balkans. In service delivery, Serbia is clearly the leader. However, Albania recently have picked up quite substantively, and also other countries are doing a lot on service delivery areas. On public finance management, Kosovo and Albania are typically with strong foundations in terms of the budget management, but also internal audit, external audit, where other countries of the Western Balkans are a little bit more lagging behind. On public procurement, it's Albania except for the legislative framework, where Montenegro is close to perfect in terms of our scoring.
Okay, and these would be some examples of let's say, the successes and leaders, overview of the leaders across the region. But we have to also discuss the downsides and the challenges, which obviously are many. And considering that this is a highly complex horizontal reform area, which requires the concentrated and continuous efforts not just of one or several institutions, but of the entire government in order to actually embed all those innovations and practices across the whole system of public administration. What are some of the core and the biggest challenges that the region has? And there maybe you can also give us some practical examples from the assessment.
Okay. I mean, the first one which is really horizontal and across the board of the Western Balkans is that while the legislative framework, the policy framework seems to be more and more in place, implementation is a major challenge.
So the implementation gap is a never-ending story.
Implementation gap is a never-ending story. And it is not only implementation gap in terms of plans and commitments, so whether there is an overcommitment, but it is also about the implementation of the legislative framework. More often than not, we see that legislation is either not implemented or there, apart from the former rules, there are also informalities which are distorting the picture, and the end results in terms of the functioning of the administration is suboptimal.
And this also negatively affects the rule of law, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, legal certainty is a major challenge, and I was mentioning that we are doing citizen surveys, so large-scale public opinion surveys as well. That is also reflected in the different countries to different extent, of course, but it is also reflected. This uncertainty, trust issues, this is in the forefront of the minds of the citizens. When it comes to the overall functioning or of the overall challenges, what is also worth mentioning is that we see that political stability or instability, frequent election cycles have direct and imminent impact.
Of course, I mean,
the implementation of reforms.
Long technical government mandates where new legislation is not passed, and which often also serve as a kind of a justification and not to pursue the reforms, right?
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. When we are going into the details of the different areas, let me just highlight a couple of examples. On the public service and HRM area, for example, what we see is that countries are more aligned to the standards expressed throughout the principles in terms of the overall general recruitment. There are loads of problems, smaller technical ones, bigger related to the attractiveness, but there are more persistent or emerging problems in terms of senior civil service or top public management. This is all across the board. There are better performers, of course, and there are less good performers, and there are some countries where the top public management corps is not even established. The other issue, what we are also seeing in terms of public service and human resource management, is the lack of data or data-driven management of public resources. I mean, the human resources. If any planning of the human resources exists, that's not really data-driven, and very often it is not even existing. And it pairs also with how to use digital tools for the management. So human resource management information systems is also an issue where we are seeing emerging positive trends, but the region as a whole is not there yet than what would be necessary for a well-functioning administration. When we go to policy making, evidence-based policy making, we see the same. The rules are there, the regulations requiring evidence-based policy making, transparency in terms of consultations are mostly there. Even the policy expressing the willingness of the government to exercise these tools and utilize these tools are there. But then, in terms of implementation, we see huge gaps. We also see that generally the centers of government are not strong enough to control the quality.
So the silo structures persist
Absolutely
in the governments.
persist. And in addition to that, what we also see, which is still a persistent trend, it was critically bad in 2021, now it's more diverse, is the utilization of extraordinary procedures by governments and parliaments to approve laws, which is a major problem.
And you said 2021 was especially a problem.
Partially because of COVID.
So
course.
crisis situations obviously affect negatively
yes,
these
but
procedures.
It seems that this is going beyond the crisis. There are some comforting elements of the extraordinary procedures, but it is seriously hampering the transparency and the openness of the policy-making processes. When we get to organization, typically what we see is that the organizational structures are still unclear. Sometimes even the organizational hierarchy is not clear and it is not applied, so new organizations emerge. We still see too many practically executive agencies which are directly reporting to assemblies. We also see that the evidence behind merging, abolishing or establishing new organizations are not really exercised. We see typically a lack of performance orientation and performance management, both ministries and subordinated institutions. And we see major gaps. This is less the case in some countries, more the case in other countries, in terms of empowering managers, so managerial accountability.
Managerial accountability,
yeah. When we get to the oversight, the major problem what we see is that though the oversight institutions, we are specifically focusing on ombuds institutions and supreme audit institutions. The legal framework is there, they are empowered, even their independence is usually duly protected, but their recommendations are not properly picked up, they are not properly implemented, and unfortunately what we generally see is that the parliaments, the national assemblies are not really partners with these institutions to hold the executive accountable and make the necessary changes. We are also seeing challenges in terms of the access to information. The framework, yet again, it's mostly there, it is following international standards, but then there are extreme cases when journalists, for that matter, or civil society organizations, or the individuals cannot really utilize the rights what they have for access to information. On the integrity side, what we see is that the framework is relatively well functioning. This is probably one of the strongest areas within the accountability, but statistics, data on integrity violations and their follow-up or whistleblower protection is scarce, best. Administrative justice is also uneven. So I was mentioning North Macedonia as a good case, but we have critically bad situations as well, where citizens on administrative cases need to wait for years to have a final decision by the courts.
So administrative courts are very inefficient.
Yes, there are loads of inefficiency issues with the administrative courts. However, on the positive side, the proliferation or emergence of general laws of administrative procedures are helping the development of the administrative justice system overall. On service delivery, what we see is also uneven. So we see very good progress, very good innovations, but also more emergence of some of the enablers, service delivery enablers, but this is really uneven. We see that very often the modernization of services are not properly followed up by having focus on monitoring how these services are provided. Service standards are not really there. But also the new developments of the laws on general administrative procedure, like the once only concept, which is about that citizens and businesses have to provide an information only once to the administration, and it cannot be asked again and again in a repeated manner. So the yet another paper kind of culture should be eliminated. It is still persistent or existing in many cases, or very often. We also see on the service delivery area that while it is super attractive to governments, so it is in the forefront of the reforms.
It's the ultimate vote winner if you can really improve the public services,
Absolutely,
right?
But at the same time, managing these policies are often proliferated between different organizations, and this is also not helping efficient implementation. When we get to public finance management, for that matter, we see very uneven practices even on the standards for internal control and internal audit. On the budget management and budget planning side, the major issue is that there are too many organizations, so-called first-level budget users, very often, and generally it is true to the Western Balkans that their number is higher than what is the good practice or standards in more developed countries. But we also see that there are good developments, for example, in financial risk management. At least there are certain spots where we see these developments. On external audit, we see that the fundamentals are there, they are properly functioning. Their recommendations are actually better utilized by the institutions and better recognized than what is the case with the ombuds institutions, typically. But their focus on performance audit, on the quality of their audit, still requires further development.
So still predominantly compliance-oriented audit?
Well, I wouldn't even say that it's just requiring additional efforts, okay? And then finally, on public procurement, we see more and more alignment to the EU acquis, which is hard acquis. But we see loads of differences and loads of difficulties, for example, with the review system. So the actual practice, the actual application of the procurement standards is still requiring a lot of focus.
Okay, thank you. I mean, this is really a wealth of information, and I'm sure that our listeners, viewers will be able to access the reports soon on Sigma's website.
Yes.
So you will also produce some overviews and
Yes.
shorter versions, so not everybody will have to read the 200-page reports in order to get more information. What I wanted to ask you for the end, I mean, we as the Weber Initiative, we represent in a way, and we work with civil society to increase and improve participation of civil society organizations in this wide area of reform. We have been building capacities, we have been doing also monitoring work inspired by the work that Sigma is doing, and kind of trying to gradually become the actors who will be able to continue to drive the reforms in the region, even one day if hopefully we join the EU and Sigma is not there anymore to push for these reforms. So this is how we view our role in this reform. Can you tell us a little bit about how Sigma sees the role of civil society? Why is civil society important? Why do you have meetings with civil society organizations when you conduct your assessments?
Well, we are not just having meetings with the civil society organizations. What we promote, the involvement of civil society organizations into public administration reform in all the different areas, what we are covering. And the reason is generally twofold. One, an external view is always helping in terms of keeping those who are empowered by us, the citizens, with our votes, to be held accountable. They are giving us promises, we are voting to them, what they are doing on the basis of those promises. But going beyond that, they are spending our money, right?
Yes.
We are providing with our taxes money for the state to function. We are expecting value for money.
Yeah.
And I think that civil society organizations are essential engines to have the voice of the citizens and businesses as well in terms of making sure that this is really the practice. In addition to that, civil society organizations are also knowledge hubs,
Yes.
which should be utilized by the governments. The time when both public administration officials and politicians should assume that they know better and they can have the answers to the different and very complex policy questions is way over and long over. So it is ultimately the interest of the state to involve as many voices in as many different platforms into the evidence-based policymaking as it is possible.
And indeed, it is part of the participatory democracy that we are all working towards. We at the Weber Initiative will continue to build these knowledge hubs. We will continue to rely also on your generous support in increasing those capacities and continuing our work. And I was really happy to have you as a guest today and to discuss this. And I'm looking forward actually to the publication of the report and to learning all the details. So thank you very much for joining us for this new episode of the Weber TV series. And stay tuned for more news both from Weber and from Sigma OECD. Thank you.